All right, what's going on, everyone? In this video, we're going to be building 3 mini projects using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, to begin, let's go ahead and run through the projects that we're going to be building here today. So first off, we have our article preview component here, which is going to be very simple. It's going to be your basic HTML and CSS where we use Flexbox to go ahead and align the left side here, the image, and the right side, our content, and then we'll use Flexbox a few more times to go ahead and align a few more things. Now, the one thing we're going to be using JavaScript for within this project is to go ahead and expose the share menu when we go ahead and click on the share icon right here. So when we click on this, you can see it's going to expose the share menu right here. And if I click on it again, it's going to close. Now, all these projects are responsive. So if I go ahead and click inspect here, you'll see that it's going to convert to, it was a row and now it's going to stack as a column here. And when we click on the share button now, it's going to be a little bit of a different setup where the whole bottom portion of the card is going to be our sharing here. Okay, so that's the first project we're going to be building. Now next we have our FAQ accordion card here. So how this works is when we click on one of the questions here, it's going to expand the answer like this. Now one thing I did implement into this component or project is when we click on another question here, it's going to automatically close or collapse the previous question. Okay, and like the first project, this is also responsive. So if I go ahead and inspect this here, you can see that it looks really good on mobile devices as well. All right. So the last project we're going to be working on here is going to be a little more complicated. It's going to be a pricing component with a slider. So how this works is you can see here by default for $16 a month, you get 160,000 page views. This is supposed to be for a website traffic application or something like that. So what happens here is when we change the slider from left to right, you can see that it's going to change from $19 a month and it's going to recalculate the page views here. Now, another cool feature we're going to implement here is the ability for monthly billing and yearly billing. So if we have yearly billing selected, we want to give the user a 25% discount. So if I flip this button right here, you can see that it's going to apply the 25% discount to the monthly price for the page views. Okay, so this one's also responsive as well. So if I go ahead and click inspect here, you can see that it's going to look well on mobile applications here. All right, so those are the 3 projects we're going to be building here today. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, really quick, I would like to mention that all 3 projects that we're going to be building here today are coming from Front End Mentor, which if you've never heard of the service before, I'll leave the link down below in the description. They provide you with a whole bunch of free project ideas that you can go ahead and use to practice your front end development skills here. So as you can see, they have a ton of projects. So if you struggle with coming up with project ideas, this is definitely going to be the platform and service for you. Okay, so here in VS Code, I have a folder called 3 mini projects, and inside of here, we have a folder for each project that we're going to be building here today. Now, if I go ahead and expand one of these folders here, you'll see that I have it populated with all the assets and files that we're going to be needing to build out that particular project. And I went ahead and done this for each one of our projects. So if I go ahead and expand FAQ, you'll see the same thing, and also the pricing slider. Now, for each one of the files here, I've already went ahead and pre-populated it with the default or kind of the starting structure that we're going to be using for each one of our projects here. So, for example, here inside of the index.html, I have the boilerplate here, and all I've done is set the title, and I've done the linking of our style sheet and also the app.js. Now, within the style sheet here, what I've done is a reset, and then we're importing a Google font right here. Now, one thing I did do within the app.js for each one of these projects is for each thing or each kind of like item that we need to do for that particular project, I went ahead and did a comment here. So that way, if you want to pause the video and try to attempt these yourself, you can go ahead and do that. Then you can unpause it and see what I come up with. All right, so if you want to follow along with me with the structure, all you need to do is head down below to the description. I'll have a link to the GitHub repository, and I'll go ahead and go over here now. And it should take you to right here. And if you're not seeing the starting files, which the link should take you there, make sure you're on the branch right here of starting files and not the main. The main branch is going to have the completed version for all these projects. So if you want to follow along with me from the start, make sure you're here on the starting files and just download the code from GitHub. All right, so let's begin on our first project, which is going to be the article preview component, which is this right here. So you can see this is the mobile form, and then this is going to be the view when it's on desktop. Okay, so let's head over to VS Code and get started. So first off, let's open up the article component folder here. and then let's navigate to the index.html file. Now what I want to do first off is I want to open this file with Live Server. Now if you've never heard of Live Server, it's an extension for VS Code that allows us to view the changes live that we make within our HTML file within our browser. Okay, so if I go ahead and click on Open with Live Server, we should see that it's going to open up this file right here, which currently we don't have anything in, so it's going to be blank, but we do have the title right here. Okay, now what I should also do, or probably would be helpful, is I want to go over the additional extensions I'm using within this video that may be helpful for you as we go along building these projects. So if I click on the extensions tab here, we're going to be using the extension of bracket pair colorizer, which is very helpful for when you're doing JavaScript to go ahead and colorize the brackets within your JavaScript to go ahead and make it easier to read. Then we have this HTML and CSS support, which I highly recommend, helps out a lot. Then, like I mentioned, we have Live Server here. And then the last one is going to be Prettier, which is going to format our code to make it look a lot easier and better to read. Okay, so those are the extensions I'm going to be using here. So let's get started with our markup. Now to begin, what we'll do here is we'll create a div with a class of card. Now within this div, we're going to have two children elements. We're going to have one for the image and then one for the actual article content itself. So we'll create a div here and give it the class of img. And then inside of here, we'll have our image tag, and then we'll navigate to our images folder here, and we want to select the drawers.jpg, and that's going to be it for our image div here. Now below this, we're going to have a div for the article content. So what I'll do is we'll go ahead and give this a div with a class of article. Okay. Now inside of here, we're going to have an additional two divs, one for the article preview and then one for the bottom portion, which is going to have the author and also the share menu. Okay, so let's go ahead and say div, and we're going to give this a class of article, and we'll do, let's see if I can type preview here. Now within this, we're going to have a header and then a paragraph tag. Now to save some time, what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste this content in, and feel free to do the same from the finished repository to save some time here. So that's going to be our article preview. Now below this, what we're going to do is we're going to create our second div, which is going to have the class of share. So we'll say share. Now how I did this is if we go back over to the finished version here, you can see that the desktop share menu is a little bit different from the mobile share menu here. So what I went ahead and did was actually created separate markup for this version right here, and then also this version here. Now, we didn't need to do this, but I felt in this instance of how we needed to align all this and how it worked on the mobile version, it made sense to have separate markup for the desktop and the mobile version. Okay, so within our share here, first off, what I want to do is we're going to create a div with a class of share /bar and then mobile here. Now within this, what we want to do is we want to grab, or we want to insert a span here, and we're going to have this say share. Now what we need to do is we have our images from our images folder here, which are going to be, Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter. Okay, so obviously if you wanted to actually have these go somewhere, you'd wrap them in an anchor tag, but for this project and component, we don't really need to do that. It's not going to go anywhere. So all I'm going to do is just create image tags here, and then we're going to go ahead and navigate to the images folder here, and we'll select Facebook, and then I'm going to duplicate this down 2 more times, and then we'll go ahead and change this out here. So we'll say / and we'll do Twitter, and then we'll go ahead and remove all this as well. And we'll do the last one, which is going to be Pinterest here. Okay, so that's going to be the styling, or sorry, that's going to be the markup for the share bar mobile. Now, the desktop one will be the same exact markup, so we'll go ahead and just copy and paste that in once we get to that. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse this. And then the next div we want to go ahead and create here is going to be for the actual author. So that's going to be this section right here. So we'll say div, and we'll do a class of author here. Now inside of here, we're going to have our image, and then we're going to navigate to the images folder once more, and we want to get the avatar. I think her name's Michelle, so we'll say avatar michelle.jpg. And then below this, we want to create another div here, which is going to be the author, and we'll say details. And then we're going to have a paragraph tag here, which is going to be Michelle Appleton, I believe is her name. So we'll go ahead and copy that in here. And then this is going to be the date here of when this article will be posted. So we'll say 28 June, and we'll do 2020 here. Okay, and that's going to be it for the author. Now the next thing we need to do here is we're going to have a div for the actual share image itself, which we're going to be able to click on to toggle the share bar. Okay, so we'll do div, and we'll have the class of share image here. And then what we want to do is inside of here, we're going to have our image. So we'll say img. We'll navigate to our images folder once again, and we're going to look for the icon.share svg. Now, since we are going to position our share bar desktop very close to the share image here, or this actual icon, what we're going to do is we're going to place the share bar desktop markup directly inside of the share image div, and then later on within the styling, we'll go ahead and position that absolute so that we can go ahead and move it relatively close to this right here. So all I'm going to do is, because it's the same exact markup, I'm going to copy this right here. And then what we'll do here is, instead of saying share bar mobile, we'll say share bar desktop like that. And that should go ahead and do it for our markup. So if we go ahead and close this up and we head over to our live server here, you'll see that we're left with this. So that's going to be our markup, like I said. So let's go ahead and get into the styling to make things look a little bit better. All right, for the styling, what we're going to be doing is a mobile first approach, meaning we're going to style everything out for a mobile viewport, and then anything that needs to be adjusted for desktop we'll do inside of a media query. Okay, so let's begin here, and let's go ahead and target our body here first. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass a height value here, and we're going to say 100 VH. We're going to display this as flex. Now to go ahead and push everything to the center here, we're going to say justify content set at the center, and then we'll do align items set at the center as well. And then lastly here on our body, I want to add a padding here on the left and right of 20 pixels. So we'll say padding on the top and bottom, we'll set that to 0, and then the second value here will be for the left and right, and we'll set that to 20. Okay, now next up here, let's target our card. So we'll say our .card here, and then we'll display this as flex, and we'll say flex direction here on mobile we'll set to a column. Then once we get to a viewport we're comfortable with for desktop, we'll set that to be a flex direction of row. Okay, then let's give this a max width on mobile. We'll say 350 pixels. Then we'll give it a width of 100% here. And we want to round the corners onto this card. So we'll say border radius, and we'll do 12 pixels around all the sides. And then we'll pass it a background color here of white. And then lastly, what I'm going to go ahead and do is copy and paste in this box shadow here, as it is a little bit lengthy. So that is going to be the styling for our card here. Now next up, let's go ahead and target our image. So we'll say our image class here, and then the image tag. And then what we're going to do for this is we'll start off by displaying this as block. Then we'll give it the width value of 100%. And then we're going to pass it a border radius here. So what we want to do is you want to give it a border radius on the top left of 12 pixels. Then the next value is going to be for the top right, we'll say 12. And then the next two we want to set to 0. So this is going to be for the bottom right and then for the bottom left. Okay, so if we save this and take a look, we should be left with something like this where we have everything stacking now. So let's go ahead and move on to targeting the actual article preview content here. Okay, so let's go ahead and go below the image tag here, and let's target the article preview. And then what we want to do for this is we're going to just pass it a padding value of 32 pixels on the top. Then we want to do 32 on the left and right, and then for the bottom we don't want any padding, so we'll pass a third value here for or as 0. Okay, and that's going to be it for the article preview itself. Now what we want to do is we want to target the H1 and paragraph tag within the article preview div itself. Okay, so we could just go ahead and pass H1 here because we only have one H1 within our project, but to keep things consistent, what we'll do is we'll say article preview H1, so it only targets a specific header, and then we'll say font size, we'll give it 16 pixels, we'll pass it a color here, and we'll go with 48556A, and let's go ahead and get into a better view here. and then we'll pass it a margin bottom value of 12 pixels. Okay. Then next up, let's go ahead and do our article preview class again, and let's target specifically our paragraph tag here. So let's go ahead and get into view again. And what we want to do here is we're going to pass it the color. Oh, we'll start with font size here. So font size, we'll do 13 pixels. And then we're going to give it a font weight of really light, which is going to be 200. And then we'll pass it the color of 6E8098. Okay. And that's going to be it for the paragraph tag here. Okay, so if we take a look, that should look a lot better. Now, next up, we need to begin working on the share section right here. So let's go ahead and begin to target that. So we'll say share here specifically. And what we want to do here is we want to display this as flex, and we want to align the items to the center. And to push it away from the preview content, we'll go ahead and pass it margin top and do 30 pixels. And then we want to add a padding value here of 22 pixels on the top and bottom, and then 32 on the left and right. Okay. Now, next up, we're going to target the author. So we'll say author here, and we're going to display this as flex. We're going to give it a flex value of 1. And what we want to do here is we want to provide it the property of gap, which is going to add separation between the flex items of our author div here, and we're going to pass it the value of 12 pixels, and then we're going to align the items to the center here. Okay. Now, next up, we need to target the actual image within our author div here. So we'll say author and then our image. And we want to give this a fixed width of 40 pixels, and we'll give it a fixed height as well. We'll say 40 pixels. And then we'll give it a border, let's see here, radius, and we'll do 50%. Okay, and that's going to go ahead and do it for the image. Now, next up, we have our author details. We have the actual paragraph tag, which is going to be the name here. And then we have our span tag here, which is going to be for the date. So what we want to do is let's target those specifically again to keep things consistent. So we'll say, let's see here, author details. And then let's target our paragraph tag here, and we'll give it a font size of 13 pixels and a color, which we've already used before, of 48556A, and that's going to be it for the paragraph tag. And then let's do the same thing, author details here, and target our span tag, and we'll say font size again, 13 pixels, and then we'll give it a color here of, let's see, 9DAEC2. Okay, and that's going to go ahead and do it for the span tag. Okay, so that's starting to look a little bit better. Now, the next thing we're going to actually target is our share image right here, or the share div, which has the share icon and currently the unstyled share desktop bar. Okay, so let's go ahead and go below our span here, and let's do scroll up here. So we'll target our share image here, and we want to give this a fixed width of 30 pixels and a fixed height of 30 pixels as well. We want to give this a border radius to make it round, and we're going to say 50%. We're going to display this as flex, and the reason why we're doing this is because we have the icon inside of here. So to get it to the center, we're going to display it as flex, and we'll say justify content to the center and align items to the center. Okay, so I was going to go ahead and push it horizontally and vertically to the center of the actual share image div here. Okay, then what we'll do is we're going to pass it a cursor or pointer, and then we're going to give it a background color here, and we're going to say F1, F1, F1. Okay, now let's go ahead and target specifically the image inside of our share image div here. So we'll say share image, and we'll do image. And we're going to give it a pointer events of none. Now, right now, this really doesn't make sense to why we're doing that, but once we get into the JavaScript, I'll explain why we added this property to the image, but for now, just know we are adding it to the image. And then we want to display this as block. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to go ahead and work on is actually these two bars right here, because currently they're making things look a little bit weird. So let's go ahead and start to target these. Now we're going to have some shared styling between the desktop bar and the mobile bar. So what we'll do is we'll start off with our shared styling. So we'll target share dash bar dash desktop, and then we'll also target share bar desktop, and we'll say mobile here. Now the shared style that we're going to have between these two is we're going to have a background color of the 48556A. We want to do the text transform to uppercase. We're going to have a color for the text, which is going to be the 9DAEC2. We're going to pass it the gap property of 16 pixels because these will both be displayed as flex. Then we'll pass it a font size of 13 pixels here, and then we'll align the items to the center here, and then we'll pass it the flex value of 1. Okay, now for individual styling here, let's go ahead and target share bar desktop. We'll do actually mobile first, so we'll do mobile here, and then what we want to do for this one, or this mobile bar specifically, is pass it a padding value of 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and then 0 on the left and right. And initially what we want to do is we want to have this displayed as none, so we don't want it to show. And then we're going to pass it a width here to take up the full entirety of its space, and we'll say 100%, and that should already make things look a lot better. So you can see that now this author portion got pushed over to the left hand side. So now we need to work on this specifically right here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll come down below here and we'll say share bar desktop, and then we will display this as flex. We are going to position this absolute, and we want to give it some padding on the top and bottom of 18 pixels and then 32 on the left and right. We're going to give it a border radius to match the card's roundness of 12 pixels here. And then let's go back actually above position here to keep things kind of together. And we want to go ahead and put this to, or we're going to set the top property here, and we're going to say -45 pixels. Okay, then let's go back below border radius here, and we're going to pass a transition here of 0.3 seconds ease and all, so that way when we actually show and hide this is going to be coming in very smoothly. So if I go ahead and show you this right now, we're missing one property here, but I want to show you what this looks like. It's going to sit, let's see here, did we actually display flex, position absolute? What did we do wrong here? Okay, so the issue is we forgot to add a property to one of our classes. Therefore, what's happening is we have set the share bar desktop to be position absolute to our body tag, which is all the way up here at the very top. And since we also set the top property to -45 pixels, it is barely even visible on the page up here. So what we need to do is head back over to our style sheet here, and on our share class here, we want to add the property of position and set it to relative, and that should go ahead and resolve our issue, and that should put the share bar desktop in the correct location here. Okay, now what we also want to do is hide this initially until a user clicks on it. So we haven't hooked that ability up yet, but by default we want to hide this. So let's head back over to our styling here, and let's add the opacity of 0 here, and that should go ahead and hide it. Now what we want to do next is set up some media queries, because currently we only have the mobile view. Now once we get to a certain viewport, we want to go ahead and convert this from a column to a row like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Now first off, what I'll do is add a comment down here for desktop, and then let's open up our media query here. So we'll say add media, we'll do a min width, and we'll say 750 pixels. And then what we want to do is we want to target our card class here, and we want to set the flex direction to a row. And what we also want to do is set the max width from the initial value of 350 pixels. We want to set this to 750. Okay, so with this implemented, we should be able to head over here now and see that it is in a row format here, and it's no longer stacked. But if I go ahead and inspect it here, once we get down to a certain viewport, it'll go ahead and stack. Okay, so there are still a few things we need to go ahead and complete here for the styling. So first off, our image looks a little bit weird. It's not going the full height of the card now, so let's go ahead and work on that. And also the border radius here on the top right needs to be adjusted. Okay, so let's head back here, and then let's target the image. Okay, and then we're going to add a property of object fit. and we're going to set this to cover. We want to set the height to 100% on here, and we need to update the border radius. So we want to set the top left to 12 pixels still. Now the top right we want to set to 0, and then the bottom right we want to set to 0, and then the bottom left we want to go ahead and set to 12 pixels here. Okay, so that should go ahead and fix that, and you can see now it looks a lot better. Okay. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to set up some classes that we're going to be using for when we activate the share menu here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our style sheet, and above desktop here we're going to go ahead and add a comment, and we're going to say active share, I can type here, and we're going to say mobile here. And we're going to go ahead and create some classes. So we're going to add a class to our share. So if I go back over here, we're going to use JavaScript, and we're going to add a class dynamically to this class right here of share. Okay, so what that class name is going to be is called active share mobile. So we're going to have two different ones. We're going to have active share desktop and active share mobile. Now when this class is active, what we want to do is we want to set the background color to this div to the color of 48556A, and then we want to set the border radius here from to 0 on the top left, 0 on the top right, 12 pixels on the bottom right, and then 12 pixels on the bottom left here. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to once again target active share mobile, and then we want to target the class of author here. Now currently this is visible, but when we activate the share menu, we want to go ahead and hide this. So what we'll do is when this class is active, then we want to say we don't want to display the author div anymore, so we'll set this to display none. Okay, and then what we want to do is once again we'll target active share mobile here, and then we'll say share bar desktop, or sorry, share bar mobile here. And then we want to display this as flex because currently it is displayed as none. So we'll say display, and we'll set this to flex. Okay, and then I'm going to add one more comment down here, and we're going to say active share, and then we'll do desktop here. Now what we want to do here is we're going to have a secondary class that's going to be, or sorry, a second class we're going to add that's dynamic if it's on the desktop version. So we're going to say active share desktop here, and then we're going to say share bar desktop, and then what we want to do is we want to change that opacity value of 0 that we had, and we're going to change it to 1. Okay, and that's going to be all we need to do for the dynamic classes we're going to be adding to our project here. So if we head back over to our finished project here, or the one we're working on, you can see that everything looks really good. Now the last thing we need to do is hook up JavaScript so that when we click on the share icon, it displays the correct share menu. Okay, so here inside of the JavaScript file, what I did was lay out exactly what we need to do in order to implement this functionality into our article component. So what I'm going to do is go through all the steps here, and then after I do that, feel free to pause the video and give it a try for yourself. And once you finish, or if you can't get it, just unpause it and I'll show you my solution. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is store our share class and our share image in variables. Now, once we have that, we want to listen for a click on our icon, which is our share image right here. So what we're going to do is use that variable and listen for a click. Now, within listener itself, what we want to do is show and hide the correct share menu. So we need to add those classes we added earlier of active share mobile and active share desktop. Now, we also need to consider which one we're going to add. So we also need to check the actual width of the current browser itself when we do click on the icon. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is avoid shutting the share pop-up when clicking on it, because what's going to happen when we click on the actual desktop version, it's going to close if we don't implement a certain functionality to go ahead and check for that. Okay, so feel free to pause the video and give it a try, and once you've done that or gave it a try and you can't get it, unpause it and I will show you the solution. Okay, so let's begin by creating our variables here. So the first one we're going to call const share is equal to document.querySelector, and we're going to target our share class here. Okay, and then I'm going to copy and paste this down, and then we want to target our share image here, and then we'll change this variable name from share to share icon. Now, What we want to do is you want to listen for a click on this variable right here of share icon. So we need to say share icon dot add event listener, and then in here we want to go ahead and pass, we want to listen for a click, and then we want to run our callback here. Okay, now like I mentioned before, we want to avoid shutting the share pop-up when clicking on it. So what we're going to do is actually use the event param inside of our function here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the param of e so we can go ahead and use that event param within our function here. So let's go ahead and say an if check here. So we only want to start to toggle the classes if the target the user is clicking on is this right here. So let's run our if check here and say if e.target is equal to share icon, then we want to run this code. Now we also need to consider which class we're going to add, because we do have the active share mobile and the active share desktop. So we need to do one more check. If this is true, we want to go ahead and check the width of the current window. So we're going to say window dot inner width is less than or equal to 750. So if it's less than or equal to 750, we want to apply the active share mobile class. So how we can do that is now we can use this variable right here of share, and we're going to say share dot class list dot toggle, and then we want to toggle the active share mobile here. Okay. Now what we also need to do is, if this is true, we don't want to run the remaining of the function we're going to create, so we need to return out of here. Okay. Now if this isn't true, then we want to apply the active share desktop class. So right below our if check here, still inside of this if check where we're checking the target, we want to run the share.classlist.toggle, except we want to toggle the desktop class here. All right, so let's go ahead and move all this inside of here. Okay, so that is going to be our function. We need to go ahead and toggle our share bar. So let's go ahead and test it out to make sure everything is working. All right, let's test this out here first on the desktop view. So if I click on the share icon here, we should see that our share bar is going to be toggled in. And if I click anywhere on the share bar here, you can see it's not going to close. But if we go ahead and click on the share icon once more, it should go ahead and close the share bar here for the desktop view. Now let's go ahead and test this on mobile really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink the viewport down here to a smaller size. And now if I click on the share icon now, you can see the whole bottom portion of the card is now going to become the share bar. All right, and the same thing applies. If I go ahead and click on the share icon once more, it's going to revert back to the initial state. So that's going to go and wrap it up here for our first project. All right, for our second project, we're going to be building this FAQ accordion card where we have an image on the left-hand side here within our desktop view, and then on the right-hand side we have our FAQs. Now, when we select a question, what we want to have happen is you want to show that answer for that particular question here. Now, we also want to implement the functionality to only have one question open at a time. So if I go ahead and select on another question here, what's going to happen is you want to close the previous question and then show the one we just clicked on. Okay, and this is also mobile responsive. So if I go ahead and inspect this here, you can see that it's going to stack once we get down to a smaller viewport here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and close this and head back to VS Code, and within our FAQ folder, let's go ahead and expand this, and let's start off with our markup here. So first off, I want to go ahead and open this file up with Live Server here so we can see the changes as we make them. So currently it is blank because we don't have any markup in here. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now within our body tag here, let's go ahead and start with a div with the class of FAQ card. Now inside of here, we're going to have two children elements. We're going to have one for the image and then one for the FAQ questions themselves. So we'll start off with the div for the image here. So we'll say div.image, and then inside of here, we're going to have our image tag. And we'll say // to go into the images folder here, and we want to select the illustration woman online desktop SVG here, and that's going to go ahead and do it for the image div here. Now next up, we want to create our div for the FAQ questions, so we'll say div.faq, and then we'll say dash questions like this. Now inside of here, you want to have another div for each one of the questions that we're going to be having for this accordion menu. Okay, so first off, we want to have an H1 here. and it's going to say FAQ. And then let's create our div for the actual FAQ question itself. So we'll say div.faq like that. Now within here, what we want to do is we're going to have another div. Let me just put this into the better view for you guys here. So we'll say div.accordion Q for accordion question. Now inside of here, we're going to have a span. And the first question, I'm just going to copy and paste in the markup here, or the text for this, is going to be, let's see here, how many team members can I invite? And then below the span, we're going to have an image tag here, and we want to go ahead and grab the arrow down SVG. Okay, now below this, still within our FAQ div here, we want to go ahead and add a paragraph tag here, and we're going to apply a class here. Let's go ahead and go within here. We'll say class, and we're going to give this the class value of answer here. And then once again, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste in the text here for this as well. Okay, so that's going to be the general structure for our FAQ. Now to save some time, because the structure is going to be the same for all of our questions, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste in the rest of them from the finished repository. So feel free to head over to GitHub and go to the finished repository and grab the markup to save some time, because these are all the same class structure. Okay, so if we go ahead and paste all those in, you can see we have all of our FAQ questions now. So let's go ahead and collapse this to make it look a little bit cleaner here. And then let's go ahead and save this, and that is actually going to be it for our markup. So if we go over to our index.html file here within our browser, you'll see that we're left with this. Now for the styling, once again, we're going to be using a mobile first approach. So let's start off by targeting our body tag here. So what we want to do is pass this the property of display flex. We want to justify the content to the center. We also want to align the items to the center here. We want to pass this the height of 100 VH. We want to give it a padding value of 0 on the top and bottom, and then 16 pixels on the left and right. Now for the background here, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to pass it a linear gradient. So how we do a linear gradient here is we can say background image, and then we pass linear gradient here. And then we want to specify how we want the linear gradient to appear. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pass it to, and we're going to say, if I can spell, bottom here. And then what we say next is we specify the colors that we want the linear gradient to be. So in our case here, we're going to use the colors of, let's see, B068E9. And then we want to pass another comma here and specify the second color, which is going to be 6463E7. Okay. So now if I save this and we go back over to our browser, we should now see for our background, we have this linear gradient, which goes from the top to the bottom here. And then we have all the content pushed to the center now. Okay. So let's scroll down here a little bit, and let's target our next class, which is going to be FAQ card here. Now for this, what we want to start off with is a position relative here. We're going to give it a width of 100%, and then the max width here is going to be 920 pixels. And then we're going to specify the height to be 100% and give that a max height value of 500 pixels here. Okay, and then we're going to add some padding around all sides here of 15 pixels. And we want to display this as flex. And let's scroll down a little bit to get this back into the view. And then we're going to align the items to the center here. And then above this, we'll say flex direction, and I'll put that to column. Okay. Now we can specify the gap here between the two items. So what I want to do is put a column gap here. And we're going to say 64 pixels. And for the background color, we're going to go ahead and pass this the value. Let's see here, it's not showing up. Background color, and we're going to say white, so FFF here. Then we want to pass it a border radius here to round the corners, and we're going to say 24 pixels. And lastly, we want to add a box shadow, which once again, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste in, as it is a little bit lengthy. Okay, so there we go. Now, next up here, let's go ahead and target our image class. So we have .image, and let's once again scroll down here. And what we want to do is we want to display this as flex. We want to justify the content to the center here. Now, for our image this time, what we want to do is you want to position this absolute. So if we take a look at everything right now, you can see it looks a little bit weird, but we want to position this image right here absolute to the card itself. Okay, so that's why we went ahead and specified this property of position relative on the FAQ card up here. So we're going to say position relative. We're going to pass it the left property here of 0, and then we're going to say top negative 100 pixels here. And then we're going to say width take up 100%. Okay, so things should still not look quite right because the image is way too big. So we got to go ahead and adjust that. So let's go ahead and target our image here. And we're going to say width 220 pixels. And we're going to give it a height value of auto. And that should go ahead and fix it a little bit. So you can see the image is now a lot smaller here. Okay. Now, next up, let's go ahead and target our FAQ questions here. So we'll say FAQ dash questions here. And we want to specify here width 100%. We're going to give it a max width here. We'll say max width. And we only want this to be as large or as wide as 450 pixels. And let's just scroll down here a little bit. And we're going to give it some padding on the top here. And we're going to say 80 pixels. And then we want to center this in the middle of the screen. So we're going to say margin 0 auto. Okay. So that should look a little bit like this. Now, next up, what we want to do is we want to pass our target, our H1 here. And we're going to say margin bottom, and we're going to say 40 pixels, and we want to text align here to the center. Okay, and then next up, what we want to do is target our FAQ themselves. So this is the actual wrapper for the question and the answer. So the first property that we want to add here is going to be overflow, and we're going to set this to hidden here. So this is going to go ahead and hide the answer within the FAQ accordion menu itself. And then we're going to say margin bottom here. We're going to say 16 pixels. And then we're going to pass it a border on the bottom of 1 pixel. We'll say solid, and then F2, F2, F2 right here for the color. Okay, so if we go and take a look at it now, we should see that it looks a little bit weird. What's going on here? Did I do something wrong here? Let me see. I believe, okay, so you probably caught this mistake before I did, but we have to set this to position absolute, not relative here. So we'll say absolute here, and that should go ahead and fix our issue, because what was happening is we didn't set this to absolute, so it was applying a column gap here, which now that I think about it, we don't really need. So let's go ahead and remove that from the FAQ card here. Okay, so that should go ahead and fix that issue. All right. Cool. So now below the FAQ here, what we want to do is target the accordion question itself. So we'll say accordion -q here. And then inside of here, we want to display this as flex. And then we want to align the items to the center here. So that's going to align the question and the icon here into the center. Okay, so that looks good. And then we're going to pass a margin on the bottom here of 8 pixels as well. So the next thing we want to do here is target the accordion Q and the span. And we're going to pass this a font size of a little smaller. So default, I believe it's 16. We're going to pass this to be 14. And then to push the icon or the image all the way to the right-hand side, we'll just go ahead and pass the margin right property here and set that to auto. So that should do it for our span here. Then let's go ahead and target the accordion Q and image. Now we're going to be doing a transition, or we're going to be we're going to be rotating this image inside of the accordion Q when a user clicks on it. So to make that smooth, we're going to go ahead and apply the transition, and we're going to say 0.4 seconds, and we'll pass the value of ease and set that to all. All right. Now, next up here, we want to target our answer specifically. So we'll say answer here. Now, what we want to do is we want to pass this by default the max height of 0, because we don't want to show any of the answers. We want them all to be hidden by default. So to achieve this, along with the overflow hidden here, we can set the max height to 0, and that'll go ahead and hide it. So you can see now we don't have any of the answers showing. Okay. So what we also want to do is we're going to pass some other styles here, which you're not going to see. We're going to give it a color of 787887. We're going to give it a max, let's see here, max width, and we're going to set that 320 pixels. And then the font size is going to be a little smaller at 12. And then once again, we're going to pass the transition here so that when we go ahead and toggle or show and hide each answer, it's going to happen in a smooth transition here. So we'll say 0.4 seconds, ease, and set that to all. Okay, so that's going to do it for the mobile, I should say, styling here. So what we need to do is we need to add some media queries here to alter the appearance of desktop, because right now, no matter how big we get, this is how it's going to look, and that doesn't look so great. Okay, so let's head back over here and let's open up some media queries. So let's go ahead and do a comment here, and we'll say desktop. And then the first media query we're going to have here is going to be, let's see, media. We're going to target the min, if I can type, min width, and that's going to be 700 pixels. Okay, now once the screen gets to 700 pixels, what we want to do is we're going to target the FAQ card here, and we want to give it a padding of 60 pixels around all sides, and we're also going to position, or sorry, we're going to say overflow, and we're going to set this to hidden. Okay, now for the image, what we want to do is, let me go ahead and get this into the right view. We're going to position this, I believe we already have that as absolute. Did I do that twice? Let me see here. So image, it's positioned absolute, so we don't need to actually do that. That was a mistake on my end. So we want to set the top here to 0. We're going to set the left hand side to -80 pixels. Then we're going to say height here, and we're going to say 100%. And then we want to set the width back to initial here, back to what it initially was, because if you recall, what we did is we set that to, I believe, 100% right here. So we want to go ahead and reset that back once we get to 700 pixels here. And then we are going to align the items to the center, and then justify content. We had set that to center. We're going to set that to flex, and we're going to say start. Okay, so you can see that right now it looks like this. So next up, what we want to do is we want to target the size of the image, because right now it's way too small. So we'll say dot image here, and then target our image, and then we'll say width and set this to 300 pixels, and we'll give it a height of auto here. Okay, now next up, let's target the H1 here. So we had initially set this to text align center on mobile. We want to go ahead and put this back to start on our 700 pixels viewport or larger. And then we need to target our FAQ questions here. And what we want to do is we want to remove that padding on the top. We had set that to 80, so we're going to put that to 0. We're going to give it a max width itself to 350 pixels here. And then the margin, what we want to do is we're going to set 0, 0, 0, and then the left to auto, so that way it pushes it all the way to the right hand side. Okay, and then we also want to target the FAQ here, and we want to set this to a flex direction. And I believe we actually, let's see here, we shouldn't need to actually target that as well. That should be all set. Okay, so if we go over here now, you can see this is pushed all the way over here to the right hand side, which looks good. Okay, so there we go. Now the next media query that we want to go ahead and target is going to be once we get to 850 pixels. Okay, so we'll say at media again, and we'll do min width here, and we'll set this to 800 pixels. Now inside of here, what we want to do is first off, we want to target the FAQ card again. We're going to adjust the padding. So we'll say FAQ card here, and the padding what we want to pass here is going to be 85 pixels on the top, 95 pixels on the right. Then we want to do 65 pixels on the bottom, and then 30 pixels on the left here. Okay, and then lastly, what we want to do is, once again, we want to update the size of the image here. So we'll say image, image, and then we'll do a width here of 425 pixels, and then the height to auto, and that should go ahead and wrap it up for the styling here. So as we get, so right now we are above 700 pixels, so we're going to be in that media query, which we just did a few moments ago. And then once we get to 800 pixels, you can see it's going to get a lot larger here, and it's going to mimic what we have here in our finished version. Okay, now one last thing I want to do for the styling here is I want to add the active state for when, or the active classes inside of our styling here for when we have a question open. So let's go ahead and do a comment here, and we'll say active state here. And then we'll say the class we're going to add is just going to be active. So once that is active, we want to target our image here. And then we want to transform, and we want to rotate this 180 degrees here. Okay. And then lastly, we want to target active once more. And then we want to target the answer here. And then we're going to pass it a margin bottom of 16 pixels. And that is going to go ahead and wrap it up for the styling here. Now, lastly, what we need to do is implement our JavaScript so that way we can show and hide each one of our questions here when we click on it. All right. Now, what I went ahead and did, very similar to the previous project, is inside of our JavaScript file here, I've laid out all of these steps or requirements that we need to take in order to implement this functionality into our project here. So what I'm going to do is go through all the steps here, and then once I finish with that, feel free to pause the video and give this a try on your own. And once you have the solution, or if you gave it your best shot, feel free to unpause it and I'll walk you through the solution that I came up with. Okay, now first thing here we need to do is store the accordion questions and the FAQ card in variables. All right, now next what we want to do is we want to listen for a click on any of the questions. Now within the listener that we go ahead and create to listen for that click, we want to go ahead and first off get the height of that specific answer, or the specific answer of the question that we just clicked on. Now, next what we want to do is you want to check if the question has already been clicked, and if it has, and it has the class that we're going to add down here, if it already has that, we want to close it and then return out of the function. Now, next up what we want to do is we then want to reset all of the questions and answers back to the initial state of being closed, so that way we only can have one possible answer open at a time. And then at the very end here, what we're going to do is you want to apply or add an active class to the question selected, and then apply this height that we went ahead and obtained right here in the beginning of our listener. All right, so those are the steps and requirements. So feel free to pause the video now and give it your best shot. And once you have it completed, or like I said, you gave it your best shot, feel free to unpause it and I'll walk you through my solution. So let's begin by creating our variables here. So the first one we're going to call questions. And we're going to set this equal to a document.querySelector, and we're going to select all because we have multiple elements with this class name that we want to go ahead and grab. So we'll go ahead and say accordion Q here, and then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and duplicate this down, add our semicolon, and then the next one we want to create is called FAQ card here. Okay. And then we don't want to do document.querySelector all, we just want to do document.querySelector here. And we'll change this to FAQ card like that. Okay. Now, next what we want to do is we want to listen for a click on any of the questions. So what we first need to do is we want to run a for each loop through each one of our questions here. So how we can do this is we'll say questions.forEach, and we need to pass a param here, which we'll go ahead and call this question. And then we have our callback. All right. So what we want to do at this point is we want to look at the question here, and we want to add a event listener here, and we're going to look for click. And then every time we hear a click, we want to go ahead and run our arrow function here. Okay. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is let me go ahead and just copy and paste all of this into the add event listener here now. Okay. And we'll go ahead and put this right there. So first thing we want to do is get the height of the answer. So how we can do this is let's first create our variable here and call this height, and we're going to set equal to the question. Now what we want to do is we need to somehow get a hold of the answer, which if we go back to our HTML here, you can see right now this question parameter right here, or this question right here that we're using, is actually this class right here. Now within JavaScript, what we can do is we can actually get the next sibling or next element sibling after this right here. So how that's going to look is we're going to say const height equals question dot next element sibling, and then we can go ahead and get the scroll height, which is going to give us the height of that particular answer here. So we'll say scroll height. Okay. Now if I go ahead and say console, let's see, let's just show you this, console.log, and we say height here. And then we go back to our application and we go ahead and inspect this and go to the console. So what we should see now is the height for whenever we click on one of these questions. So you can see this is going to be 30 pixels, the first one. The second one's also 30. And then the third one's here a little bit longer. That's 45 pixels, 30, and then 30. Okay, so that's how we can dynamically get the height of each one of our answer divs. All right, so let's go ahead and close this off, and we don't need this here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we need to check if the question is already been clicked, and if it is, we want to go ahead and close it and then return out of the function, because what in this case what's happening is the user clicks on the same question, therefore we want to go ahead and close it. So we need to run a if check here. And what we want to do is we're going to say if question, and then what we're going to be doing here is we want to add a active class to the parent element of this question here. So what we're referring to is this right here. So we're going to add an active class to this element right here. Now, how we're going to do that is through another property called parent element. Okay, and then what we want to look for on the parent element is if the class list is going to contain the class that we're going to add, which is going to be active here. Now, if this is true, that means the question is already open, so therefore we want to go ahead and close it. So we need to do a few things. So first off, at this point, the question is going to be open, so we want to go ahead and first off remove that active class. So what we're going to say here is question dot parent element dot class list, and we want to run the remove method here, and we want to remove that class of active here. Okay, now the next thing you want to do is we want to set the max height back to 0, because what we're going to do down here is we're going to dynamically set the max height of the FAQ or the answer within the question here to the height that we have right here. So we want to go ahead and reset that question's max height or the answer max height back to 0. So we'll say question, and we're going to use the next element sibling again property here, and then we're going to say style. And then we want to go ahead and target the max height. So don't know why I did that, but we'll say max height. Now remember, when you target stuff in JavaScript that has spaces, like max height does right here, or I think dashes, you need to go ahead and do camel case. So what we'll do is we'll set this equal to 0 pixels. Okay, and then we want to return out of the function because we don't want to do anything else below this if this is true. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is if this isn't true, that means the user clicked on a new question, so therefore we want to go ahead and reset all the questions back to their initial state of being closed. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and target the questions here, and we're going to do another for each, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the param here of q because we've already used question, we can't use it again, and then we're going to run our callback here. So what we want to do is going to be very similar to this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually copy and paste this in here. So what we're going to be doing is, let's go ahead and change this to Q though and not question so we can target the right one. So what this is actually saying is that it's running through all the questions we have, and it's going to remove active and set the max height back to 0. Okay, pretty easy and pretty simple there. Now the final thing we want to do is if all of this, so if this is not true, we reset the question here, but now we want to go ahead and select, or we want to set the question that we clicked on to have the class of active and then apply that dynamic height that we've got right here. Okay, so how we're going to do this is we're going to say question dot parent element again dot class list, but this time you want to go ahead and do add, and then we're going to add the class of active here. Okay, and then lastly we want to go ahead and actually give it that max height of the height variable that we have up here at the very beginning of our event listener. So we'll say question dot next element sibling dot style dot max height is going to equal. Now in order for us to actually apply this, we need to use interpolation here. So we're going to say our backticks, our money sign, we'll use our height variable here, and then we're going to go ahead and say pixels here. Okay, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our JavaScript. So let's go ahead and test this out to make sure that we can now show and hide each one of our accordion questions. Alright, so now that we have our JavaScript implemented, we should be able to click on our questions here and show the answer for that particular question. So let's go ahead and test this out. So if I click on the first one here, you can see that the answer is going to be exposed, and we have our icon here rotating 180 degrees. And if I click on the question again, it's going to close that question back up. Now, if I go and select another one and we go to open the first one again, you can see that that question down here is going to close, and then this one's going to open. Now, one thing I do want to change here is the cursor on the question itself. It looks a little bit off. So what we can do is here inside of our style sheet on the Accordion Q class itself, we can just add a cursor property here and change it to a pointer. And if we go back over here, that is going to look a lot better, and that is going to wrap it up for this project. Now for the final project, we're going to be building a interactive slider component for a hypothetical hosting service. So how this works is we have our slider bar right here, and when we slide it to the left and the right, it's going to update the amount you pay per month and how many page views you're going to get for that price. Now, in addition to this, we can also change the billing type from monthly billing to yearly billing, which is going to give you a 25% discount. And when we flip this switch right here, you can see it's going to update the amount you have to pay per month compared to the monthly price right here. All right, so that's what we're going to be building. So let's head over to VS Code and get started here. So let's head into our pricing slider folder here. And then let's open up our index.html to begin with our markup. So let's also open this up with live server here. Okay, and then inside of our body tag, let's start off with our div with a class of title here, which is going to hold our header and subheader, which is these items right here. Okay, so to save some time with this, so I don't have to type all this out, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste these H1 and H2 tags into our project here. So if you want to go ahead and get the markup for this, I would just recommend going to the GitHub repository, or you can pause the video and just type it out. But I believe going to the repo would probably be a little bit easier. So below this, we're going to have this little image that we have right here, which is going to be the circles behind our header and subheader here. So let's go ahead and add that. So we'll have our image, and we want to navigate to our images folder, and we're going to grab the pattern circles.svg, and that will go ahead and do it for our title div here. Now below this, you want to create the markup for our pricing components. So let's start off with the div here and give it the class name of pricing-card here. And then inside of here, we're going to have a few divs. The first one's going to be pricing, and then we'll go ahead and duplicate this down, and we'll give this a class name of CTA. Now in between here, we want to go ahead and create an HR tag. Now let's start off by populating our pricing div here. So within this, we're going to have a few divs as well. The first one's going to be for the actual price here. So we're going to go ahead and give it the class name of price. Now within here, we're going to have an H1, and it's going to have a span tag, which is going to have the class of page views. Now for this, you want to populate it with the default value, which is going to be 1,600,000, and then we'll say page views right here. And what we're going to do later on is use JavaScript to go ahead and dynamically change this value as our slider changes. Now below this, let's go ahead and create our paragraph tag here. Once again, we're going to have a span tag within this, and we're going to give this the class name of slider value, which is pretty self-explanatory. This will contain the value that's currently inside of the slider, which we'll go ahead and create in just a few moments here. So by default, we'll go ahead and populate this with the value of 16, and then we'll say outside of the span tag /month. Okay, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our price, or our div with the class of price here. Now below this, let's go ahead and actually create our sliders. So we're going to create a div here and give it the class name of slider wrap, and then inside of here, we're going to create our input, which is going to have the type of range. We're going to give it the class of slider. Then we want to pass it a few different attributes here. So we're going to say min, set that to 0. The max value we want to have is going to be 32. And then we also want to set a default value that it's going to be at when the page loads in. So we'll say value, and then we'll set that to 16. Now right below this, you want to create our actual button, because we're going to customize this slider. As you can see, if I save this and we head over to our browser, this is what the default slider looks like, and this is what we want to go ahead and have it look like. Now to get this like this, we can't actually use the default input here. We have to go ahead and create our own styling and markup to go ahead and achieve that. Okay, so right below our input here, we're going to create a div with a class of selector, And then within this, we'll have another div, which is going to have the class of select-btn. And then we'll have our image tag here, and we're going to go navigate to our images folder here. And we want to go ahead and grab the icon-slider.svg, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our selector markup here. Now below this, we're going to create a span tag for the filled amount of the slider bars. So we'll go ahead and dynamically set all this with JavaScript, but for now we'll just create this and say slider filled, and then we'll use JavaScript to go ahead and actually fill in the width and color of this. Well, I should say the width of this actual span tag right here. Okay, so that should do it for our slider wrap div here. Now below this, what we want to do is create our last div, which is going to have the class value of billing. Now we'll go ahead and have our span tag here, and this is going to say monthly billing. And then below this, we'll create our input, which is going to have the type of checkbox here. And then we'll pass it the class of billing dash type. And then below this, we're going to create a div, which is going to have the class name of yearly. And then we'll have our span tag in here to indicate this is going to be yearly billing. And then we want to create a little tag. If you can see right here on the finished version, we have this little 25% discount tag that we need to create. So to do this, we'll just have a span, and then we'll give it the class of tag. And then for the value inside here, we'll say 25% discount like that. And that is going to do it for our billing and then our pricing div here. So lastly, what we want to do is actually fill out the markup for our CTA div here. So what we want to do is we're going to have a div with the class of features here, and then we're also going to have a button which is going to say start my trial. So we'll say start, and let's go ahead and capitalize this, start my trial like that. Now inside of our features div here, we're going to have our individual features. So we'll go ahead and create a div with a class of feature here, and then I'll duplicate this down 3 times because the markup structure is going to be the same for all 3 of them. We'll just go ahead and change out the actual content within the span. So what we want inside of our feature div here is going to be an image, and we want to go ahead and navigate to our images folder, and we want to grab the icon check.svg here. Then below this, we'll have a span tag, and the first one's going to be unlimited websites here. If I can type, there we go. And then all we need to do is duplicate this down 2 more times and change out the content. So the second one is going to be 100% data ownership, and then the final one's going to be our email reports. All right. And that's going to go ahead and do it for our markup here. So let's go ahead and take a look at how things are looking right now. So as you can see, they're not great. So let's go ahead and address the styling here. Now, just as we've done for the previous 2 projects, we're going to be using a mobile first approach here for the styling for our last project. So let's go ahead and start off by targeting our body tag here and giving it a min height of 100 VH. We're going to display this as flex. We want the flex direction here to be a column, and we want to align the items to the center. Then we're going to pass it some padding, 0 on the top and bottom, 16 on the left and right. And then we're going to provide it a background image here, which will say URL. And then inside of here, we want to go to our images folder, and we're going to be using the BG pattern circles here. Okay, or sorry, this is actually going to be the BG pattern.svg. So we want the top one here. And then what we'll do is we're going to pass the background repeat property here and set that to no repeat. And that's going to go ahead and do it for our body. Now, next up here, let's target our title div. And then we're going to position this relative because we are going to position that image inside of this div absolute to it. Then we want to text align everything to the center. And we want to give it some margin here, which is going to be 104 pixels on the top, 0 on the left, 92 pixels on the bottom. Okay, and then what we want to do is actually that's going to be it for our title here. Then let's target our H1 inside of our title div here. So we'll say title H1, and we're going to give it a font size of 22 pixels. We're going to pass it the color of 293356, and then we're going to give it a margin on the bottom of 12 pixels here. Then let's go ahead and target our H2. So same thing, we'll do title H2, and then we're going to say color, and we're going to provide it the color value of 848 EAD, and give it a font size of 13 pixels. And then lastly, inside of this title div, we need to position our image absolute. So we'll target once again our title div here and then our image. And then we want to position absolute. We want to give it a top, and we're going to say negative 80%. Then we're going to say left 50% here. And then below this, we're going to say transform. And then we'll say translate on the x-axis, negative 50% here. And then last, what we want to do is we want this to be behind our H1 and H2. So to do this, we'll go ahead and pass a z-index of -1. So let's go ahead and save that and see how things are looking here. So if we go over to ours, you can see now we have our header, our subheader, and then our background image right behind that. So that is looking good. Now what we want to do is start to work on our pricing cards. So let's go ahead and target our pricing card here. Now first thing I want to do is we're going to give this a max width of 540 pixels. We want to pass it a background color, and we'll say white, so FFF. Then we're going to give this a width of 100%, and let's go ahead and actually put, I don't want to duplicate that, let's just put that up there to keep things consistent. And then we'll give it a height of 100% as well. And then we're going to pass it a box shadow, which I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste in to save some time, or it's a little bit lengthy. And then lastly, we want to round the corners of this pricing card, so we're going to say border radius and give this a value of 12 pixels. Now next up, we want to target the pricing div inside of our pricing card, but we don't need to go ahead and specify pricing card because we only have one pricing div, so we'll just go ahead and say dot pricing here. And then inside of here, all we want to do is pass the padding value of 40 pixels on the top, 48 pixels on the left and right, and then we're going to say 56 pixels on the bottom here. Okay. And then let's go ahead and target the price div now, which is inside our pricing. But once again, we don't have two price divs, so we can just go ahead and say dot price here. Now inside of this, we want to go ahead and first off give it the display flex. We want to say flex direction, set that to a column. We're going to align the items to the center here. And then let's go ahead and give it a row gap of 16 pixels, and then a margin on the bottom of 32 pixels here. Now inside of our price div here, we have our H1 and also our paragraph tag. So let's go ahead and say price H1, and then we're going to say text transform, and we're going to set this to uppercase. We're going to give it a font size of 14 pixels, and we're going to use a color we've already used here before, which is going to be, let's see here, color, and we'll go 848 EAD. And that should do it for the H1. And then let's target our actual paragraph tag here. And we're going to display this as flex. We're going to align the items to the center. And we're going to say color. And we want to pass this the color value of 848 EAD. I think I did that wrong. Let's see, 848. There we go. Okay. Now, next up inside of this paragraph tag, we have the class of slider value, which is going to be right here. So you want to go ahead and style this up specifically. So what we'll do is we only have one slider value again, so we can just go ahead and target this like this, slider dash value. Now inside of here, we're going to give this a much larger font size and say 40 pixels. We want to go ahead and separate it a little bit from the /month, so we'll say margin right and put that to 8 pixels, and we're going to go ahead and get us a color of 293356. All right, and that should go ahead and do it for our price div here. So if I save this and we take a look, you should start to see things are looking a little bit better, but as I said before, this is going to be a mobile first approach, so we need to go ahead and set up some media queries to make it look like this on desktop. Right now you're seeing it in a mobile view. Okay, so next up we're going to target our slider wrap here. So we'll say slider dash wrap, and we're going to set this to be position relative. We're going to give it a width of 100%, and a margin on the bottom of 40 pixels. Okay. Now, first off, we want to start to target our slider here, which is actually going to be this input right here. Okay, we gave it the class of slider. So for this, we want to pass the value of WebKit dash appearance here, and we want to set this to none, and then we also want to set the appearance to none, which if we go ahead and save that and take a look, we should no longer have the background color of the slider here any longer. Okay, so that looks good. Then what we want to do is we want to have this a width of 100%. We're going to give it a height of 8 pixels, and we're going to give it a background color of the color value ECF OFB, and then we're going to give it a border radius. So we'll say border radius 4 pixels, and I believe I still have the box shadow in here copied in, so I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in here for our slider. Okay, so you can see that now we have this, which looks a lot better from the default version that we seen initially. All right, so next up what we want to do is we don't want this thumb or this little circle here visible anymore because we're going to create our own. So we need to go ahead and remove that. So let's go ahead and begin to do that. So how we can do this is we can say dot slider : and we can say dash web kit slider, and we're going to say thumb here. And then we can go ahead and do our styling, and this should go ahead and remove or style this up specifically to how we want it. So once again, we're going to say WebKit appearance, we're going to say none. Then we want to go ahead and do a border radius on here of 50%. We're going to give it a width of 50 pixels. We're going to give it a height of 50 pixels. And then we're going to pass a z-index value here of 3. We're going to do a position relative, and then we want a cursor of pointer here. Okay, so if I save that, we should no longer see our circle here, but it actually is still here. If I was to go ahead and pass a background color of, let's say, orange, we should now see we have that circle right here, just much larger. Okay, but since we're going to go ahead and make our own custom slider, we're going to go ahead and remove that background color for now. Okay, next up, what we want to do is actually start to style our own custom selector here. So what we want to do is target our selector class. Now inside of here, we're going to pass the z-index value of 2. We want to go ahead and do a pointer events property, set that to none. We want to do a position, and we're going to say absolute. We're going to say top at -13 pixels. And then what we want to do from here is we're going to give this a width of 50 pixels. We're going to give it a height of 50 pixels. And we're going to say transform. And we're going to say translate on the x-axis and do -50%. And let me go ahead and get this into the view. And then we also want to pass the left value here of 50%. So right now you're not going to see anything because we actually haven't added any background color or anything, and we'll do that to the actual select button, but you can see nothing has changed there. Okay, so what we want to target next is going to be our actual select button. So we'll say select BTN here, and then we're going to say display flex here. Then what we want to do is justify the content to the center. We want to align the items to the center because inside of the select button we have our image, which you can see right here. So that's the image. And then what we want to do is we want to pass the width to 50 pixels. We're going to say height 50 pixels. And then we're going to give it a background color here of 10D8C4. And then we want to pass that box shadow once more. Okay, and then I believe we want to go ahead and pass a border radius here and set that to 50%. So now with that set, we should see we have our button right here, which we can go ahead and move. Well, it's moving, but we need to use JavaScript in order to actually move our selector button right here. But that is how it's going to look. All right, so that looks good. Now, the last thing we need to do here is we want to style the slider field. So by default, we have the value set to 16, which is half of the slider bar by default. So let's go ahead and target our slider field here. And we're going to say, first off, position absolute. We want to give this a height of 8 pixels because that's the size of the actual slider here. If you go back up, we gave it a height of 8 pixels, so we want to go ahead and do the same thing for the slider filled. We're going to pass a border radius on here of 4 pixels. We're going to give it the background color of the same color that we set our button to, so 10D8C4. And then we're going to say left 0. And then by default, we want to go ahead and give this a width of 50%. And we're going to say bottom, and we'll set that to 4 pixels. And to go ahead and keep things consistent, we'll go ahead and position these two, or group these with the position absolute here. Okay, so now if we take a look now, we should see we have this slider bar filled halfway, which represents where the current slider button is at. All right, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our slider, or do it for our actual slider for now. Next up, what we want to target is going to be the billing section. So we'll go ahead and target billing, and we're going to display this as flex. We're going to say flex direction is going to be a column. We're going to align the items to the center, and then we're going to justify content to the center, and we're going to give it a gap property of 16 pixels. We're going to say font size for everything. We're going to say 12, and then for the color, we're going to pass it the value of 848 EAD. Now, what we want to do is start to target the actual input and make that custom slider. Now, I've done a video on this before, and I'm not going to go ahead and get too in depth with how this actually works. So if you want to see exactly how I create this and kind of get more in depth with how it actually works, I'll go ahead and leave the link down below to the video, and you can go ahead and watch that. I'm going to quickly breeze through the styling here, but if you want to see more on how to make something like this in more detail, be sure to check out that video down below. So what we want to do here is target the input, and we only want to target the type that is equal to checkbox here. Now, once again, we don't actually have any other inputs on here, so it would be acceptable just to go ahead and target all inputs, but it's never a bad idea in case you added more to only select the one that you want to target. Okay, now first off, what we're going to do here is we want to say WebKit appearance, which we've used a few times, and we want to set that to none. We're going to set the position to relative here, and we're going to transform this, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees, and you'll see why in a moment. This is only for the mobile version. We're going to go ahead and change this on the desktop version. Then we're going to say border, we're going to set this to none. We'll do a background color here, and we're going to set this equal to CF D8EF. We'll do an outline, and I'll set that to none. And we're going to pass this the width of 43 pixels, height of 22, and then a border radius of 20 pixels, and then our box shadow here. Okay, and then what we want to do is then we're going to target the input, the type. Let's see here, type equals checkbox, and then we want to target it on before. Okay, now what we want to do here is when we're using the before selector, we have to pass the content of an empty string, and then we're going to position this absolute. So we set the checkbox to be position relative, so we're going to set this right here to absolute. Then we're going to give this a width of 14 pixels. We're going to give it a height of 14 pixels. And if you're wondering what this is, it's actually going to be this dot right here, which we see in the middle here, which is going to go back and forth. So this is what we're currently styling up. All right. Now let's go ahead and continue on here. So we're going to set a border radius to 50%. Then we're going to say, because we position this absolute, we want to go ahead and do a top value on here of 4 pixels, and then we'll say left 3 pixels. Okay, and then for the background color here, we're going to go ahead and specify it to be white, and then we want a transition on here to make the transition of the circle from the left hand side to the right hand side fairly smooth. Otherwise it'd be very instant and it wouldn't really look that good. So we'll say transition, we'll do 0.5 seconds, ease in, out, and we'll say all. And then lastly, once again, we're going to use that box shadow here. Okay, now how this works is when we select the checkbox, we can actually target our checkbox on the check state, and when it's checked, we're going to go ahead and push the dot right here if I go ahead and show you, from the top to the bottom, or from the left to the right if you're on desktop. Okay, so what we need to do is we want to go ahead and say input, and we'll do colon, and we're going to say checked here, and then we want the type again equal to checkbox, and then we want to target the before selector here. Okay, and then all we need to do is we want to specify the background, or sorry, we only need to specify the left value here, and we're going to set this equal to 26 pixels. Okay, so now if I go ahead and click on ours right here, we should see it go from the top to the bottom here. Okay, and then if I go and click it again, it's going to go back up. So what we're doing is this is actually just a checkbox, and we're clicking on it, and we're just manipulating the circle in here to go from the top to the bottom. Okay, so pretty simple, but it looks a lot more complicated than it actually is from all the styling that we have to do to achieve that. Okay, now next up what we want to go ahead and style is going to be our yearly div here, which is going to have our tag in it. So inside of here, we're just going to position this relative, and then for our tag here, we're going to go ahead and position the tag absolute. So let's go ahead and get this into the correct view here. So we're going to say position, and we'll say absolute. We're going to say top 22 pixels, and then we're going to say left here, and we're going to set this to -7 pixels. And then we're going to display this as a block element. We're going to give it a min width of, let's see here, 90 pixels. Then we're going to provide it some padding, and don't know why I got down there. We'll say padding, and we're going to do 3 pixels on the top and bottom, 6 pixels on the left and right. We're going to give it a background color of FEED-E8, and then we want to give it a color of orange, which is going to be FF8D68 here. And then we're going to pass it a font weight of a little heavier of 600, and then a border radius of 12 pixels. And if we save that, we should now see we have our tag right here, position absolute to this yearly billing div. Okay. And that's going to go ahead and do it for the pricing. Now, the next thing you want to start is with our CTA. But first, for our HR here, what I want to do is we're going to give this a border, and I want to set this to 1 pixel. We'll say solid, and then a color of ECFOFB. Okay, and that should do it for HR, which is just going to color this a little bit differently than it was by default. Okay. And now lastly, let's go ahead and target our CTA here. So we'll display this as flex. We'll do some padding on the top and bottom, 32 pixels left and right, 32 on the top and 32 on the bottom, 48 pixels on the left and right here. And then we're going to, let's go ahead and actually keep things consistent and organized here. We'll do align items to the center here, and we'll set flex direction to column. And then we'll go ahead and provide a row gap here, and we'll say 24 pixels. Now inside of our CTA, we have our features div. So let's go ahead and target our features. So we'll say features, and we're going to display this as flex. We're going to align the items to the center here, and we're going to set flex direction to column, and then a row gap to 10 pixels to go ahead and separate each flex item within our features div here. Now, speaking of our features, let's go ahead and target those. So we'll say feature. And inside of here, we want to display this as flex as well. We're going to give it a column gap. So we'll say column gap of 8 pixels. And then we're going to align the items to the center. And then lastly, what we want to do here is style up our button. So we only have one button within this project, so I'm just going to go ahead and target the button specifically. So the first property that we want to add here is going to be a cursor, and we're going to give it the value of a pointer. We're going to add some padding here to the top of 12 pixels and the bottom of 12 pixels, and then 46 on the left and right. We want to pass it the color value here for the text, and we're going to say BECDFF. Then we're going to give it a background color here, and we're going to say 293356, and then we're going to pass it a border radius here to round our button off, and we're going to say 20 pixels, and we're going to set border to none here. And that should go ahead and wrap it up for our mobile styling here. So let's go ahead and check it out and see how it looks. So we're going to be left with something like this. Now, the next thing you want to do is for our desktop view, we want it to look something more like this. So to do that, we need to set up our media query. So let's go ahead and begin to set that up here. So right below our button, I'll add a comment and we'll just say desktop like that. And then let's open up our media query here. So we'll say at media. And we're going to use a min width here, and we're going to set this equal to 540 pixels here. Now, the first thing we want to target is going to be our headers inside of our title div. So we're going to say title h1, and we're going to say font size, and we're going to change this to 28 pixels here. And then we want to target our title again, and we're going to say our h2, and we're going to say font size, and we're going to change this one to 15 pixels. Now, the last thing we want to do inside of our title div here is readjust our image. And what we want to do is we're going to say title, image, and we're going to change the top property, and we're going to set that to -50% here. Okay. Now, next up, we want to target our pricing div here. So we'll say pricing. And then what we want to do here is update the padding. So we're going to say padding 40 on the top and bottom, and then 48 on the left and right. And that's going to go ahead and do it for our padding. Now for the price, currently it is set as a flex column. We want to go ahead and set this to a flex row. So we'll say flex direction here, and we're going to say row, and we're going to pass a margin bottom of 24 pixels. Then what we want to do is target the price P, and we want to give this a margin on the left of auto to make it go all the way to the right hand side. Okay, and then that's going to do it for our price div. Next up, we want to target our billing here, and we want to give this a flex direction of row. Currently it is a column. And then if you recall, we set the transform rotate on our checkbox to 90 degrees, so that way it fit inside of our mobile view. Now that we're on desktop, we want to go ahead and target our input, and we're going to say type, and we'll do check box here. And let's go ahead and get into this better view here. And all we're going to do is we're going to take the transform rotate, and we're going to set this back to 0, so it's back at its initial rotation. So we went ahead and did like a 90-degree rotate, so it went up and down. Now we want it to go back from side to side. Okay, and then what we want to do next is we're going to target our tag here. So remember, we position this absolute, so all we're going to do is adjust the top and left properties here. So we're going to set the top to -2 pixels, and then the left we're going to set to 75 pixels. Then what we want to do is target our CTA. So currently, once again, this is at a flex column, so we're going to change the flex direction here, and we're going to say row, and we'll save this. Then we want to target our features here, and then we're going to say align the items to the flex start, because what we did on mobile is we aligned them to the center. So once we get to our desktop view, we want to go ahead and have them start at the start of the div, not in the center. And then lastly here for our button, we're just going to provide it the margin left value of auto, and hopefully if we didn't mess anything up, that should go ahead and complete our styling here. So let's go ahead and check it out, and there we go. So the last thing that we need to do here is enable us to, or give us the ability to drag this slider here, and then we need to update the value of the month here, or sorry, the value of the price per month, and then also the page views. And then we need to implement the ability to change the billing type from monthly to yearly, and then give us a 25% discount on that current value that we have inside of our slider. So let's go ahead and begin to implement that functionality here into our pricing component. Now again, I've laid out the steps that we need to take in order to implement this functionality into our pricing slider. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through all these steps, and then after I do that, feel free to pause the video and give it a try, and then I'll walk you through my solution. So first off, what we want to do is store slider, slider value, slider filled, selector, page views, and billing type all in variables. Now, once we have that, we want to create a function that's going to convert the slider value into a currency format for a monthly or yearly billing type. Now, the reason why we have to convert it from monthly or yearly is if it's monthly on the application or our component, they're not going to get a discount. But if they have it selected to yearly billing, then they're going to get a 25% discount. Now, next up, what we want to do is we want to listen for our slider input to change. So what we want to do is we want to listen for the slider to be changed. Now, whenever we hear that change, what we want to do inside of this listener is we then want to first off call the function that we created right here to go ahead and obtain the currency value. Then next up, what we want to do is we need to calculate the page views based on the slider value. So 100,000 for each value. And then we need to go ahead and dynamically insert that value into our HTML file right here inside of this span. Okay. Then what we want to do is we want to obtain the slider max value. Now, to make this dynamic, we want to go ahead and get this directly off our slider input. Okay. Then once we have that, we want to calculate the percentage for the filled bar and for the selector button. We're going to go ahead and use this percentage to then set the width of the slider filled to the current percentage that we have when this slider changes. And the same thing we're going to be using that percentage for to update the selector left property and also the transform using that percentage. And that's going to go ahead and do it for that listener. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to listen for the billing type for that to change as well. And then each time that changes, we're going to want to go ahead and once again call this function right here that we created to obtain the currency for the monthly or yearly billing. So let's begin by creating our variables here, and to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste these in. So we have our slider, slider value, slider filled, our selector, page views, and then our billing type. Now, the next thing we want to do is we need to create a function that's going to convert the slider value into currency or currency format for either monthly or yearly billing. So let's start off by creating our function. We'll call this const get price, and we'll set this equal to a arrow function here. Now, first thing we want to do is we want to check whether or not this billing type is true or false. So if it's true, that means we want to calculate for yearly. If it's false, then we want to calculate for monthly, and we're not going to do anything. So the reason we need to check, because if it's yearly, then they get a 25% discount per month. Okay, so what we'll do is an if check here, and we're going to reference our billing type variable, and then we're going to look at the checked property here. Now, this is true. That means we're going to calculate for yearly. So what we want to do is I'm going to create another variable here called discounted price, and we're going to set this equal to the slider. Now we can get the value of the slider where it's currently at by saying slider and then referencing the value property here. And then what we want to do is, because when it's yearly, we want to give them a 25% discount. So we'll times this by 0.75 here. Now what we want to do is we need to then set this variable, the discounted price, to this right here. If we go back up, the slider, the span here with the class of slider value. So what we're going to do is we're going to say slider value, which is our variable right here, and we're going to say inner HTML is going to equal discounted price, and we're going to go ahead and convert this to a local string because we want to go ahead and format it as a currency. And to do this very easily, instead of having to do some crazy manipulation, we're going to go ahead and pass it to local string method, and we're going to pass the en.us for the first param here. And then for the second param, we're going to go ahead and pass an object. And then what we can do is we can set the style, and we can set this to currency. Okay, and it's currency like that. And then what we want to do here is we're going to set the currency, and we're going to set this to USD. Now you can set this to whatever you want, but where I'm at, it's United States, so we're going to set this to USD here. Now, if this is true, then we want to go ahead and return out of here because we don't want to perform the rest of this function. Now, if this isn't true, what we want to do is then we're going to create another variable here called const, and we'll say price, and we're going to set this equal to, and we're going to do parse int here, because when we get this number back from the slider value, it's not like a number. So when we try to go ahead and do local string here, it doesn't work properly. So we want to go ahead and do parse int, and we're going to say slider dot value here. Okay, and then we're going to do the same exact thing. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this right here, and then we'll go ahead and paste it right below, and then we'll change out price. Oops, we'll copy price here, and then we'll change out discounted price. And that's going to be our function to go ahead and get the price for either monthly or yearly billing. Now, the next thing we want to do is listen for an input change here. So what that's going to require is a add event listener. So we're going to go ahead and reference our slider, and we're going to say add event listener. Now, instead of saying or looking for a click, we want to go ahead and listen for the actual input itself. So we're going to go ahead and pass input here, and then we'll have our callback. Now, the first thing that we want to do in here is call that function we just created to obtain the currency value. And to make things a little easier, what I'll do is we'll throw the comments inside of our add event listener here, and then a few line breaks like that. So let's go ahead and call our function. So we'll say get price, our parentheses, and then our semicolon. Okay, and that's going to be it. Now, the next thing we want to do is calculate the page views based on the slider value, 100,000 for each. Now, one thing we have to account for is what if the slider value is set to 0? If we have it set to 0, 0 times 100,000 is 0, and we don't want that. So if we go over to the finished version here, you can see that when we get to 0, we have it default to 10,000 page views, which is like, the free version. So let's go ahead and do an if check here. So we're going to say parse int again, because the slider value that we get from saying slider.value isn't actually a number. So we want to convert it into a number by using parse int. And we're going to look if this is equal to 0 here, not O. Now, if it's 0, what we want to do is we're going to create a variable here called const free version. And we're going to set this equal to 10,000 like this. Now, to format it, what we're going to do is we're going to say page views, or to insert this into the actual span right here, we're going to say page views dot inner HTML, very similar to how we did it inside of our function here for getting the price. And then we're going to say equals free version to local string like that, and that's going to go ahead and format it correctly with a comma after, or to go ahead and say 10,000 with a comma here. Okay. Now, if this isn't true, then we'll do an else statement here, and then we're going to say const new value is going to equal the slider dot value here, and we're going to multiply this by 100,000. And we're going to do the same thing here. We'll say page views dot inner HTML equals new value, and we're going to say to local string. Okay, and that's going to be it for calculating the page views based on the slider value. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get the max value of our slider. So what we can do is we're going to create another variable here, and we'll call this max value. And we're going to say equal to slider. And to get the max value attribute off our slider, we can go ahead and use the get attribute method here. And then we want to look for the attribute of max. So pretty easy. Now, the next thing we want to do is calculate the percentage for the filled bar and for our selector button. So we're going to use this percentage to go ahead and set the width of our slider filled, and then the left value of our slider selector, and also the transform of our slider selector. So what we're going to do here is say const percentage is going to be equal to, and we're going to go ahead and use some parentheses here, and we're going to say slider dot value divided by this max value that we just had here. So we'll say max value, and then we're going to go ahead and times this by 100, and that's going to go ahead and give us our percentage. Now, our last two things here we need to do is actually apply this percentage to make our application look good, so we can actually have our slider filled, and our button will go ahead and go from left to right as we move it on our range slider. So what we're going to say here is we're going to reference our slider filled variable, and we're going to say style, and then the width, and we're going to set this equal to, and we'll do some interpolation here, and we're going to say percentage, and then we're going to have a percent here. Okay, so that's pretty easy, and then let's go ahead and save that. And then the last thing we need to do here is update the selector left and transform to this percentage variable here. So once again, we'll go ahead, well actually not once again, we're going to reference our selector this time. We're going to say style, and then we're going to reference our left, and we're going to set this equal to, once again, some interpolation here. And we're going to say percentage, and then add our percent on the outside here. And then we want to say selector.style once more, and then we want to affect, or we want to target the transform property here. And we want to set this equal to, and we're going to do some more interpolation here. We're going to say translate on the X, and then we'll do our parentheses here, and we're going to say negative, and then we want to reference our percentage. Okay, and that's going to be all of the code here inside of our event listener here. Now what we need to do is we also want to listen for the billing type input to go ahead and change, and if it changes we want to go ahead and run our get price function. So we can say billing type dot add event listener, and we're going to listen for the change event on this, and then once we hear that we want to run our callback here, and then all we want to do inside of this callback is run our get price function here. Okay, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our JavaScript. So let's go ahead and test this out. Now, before we test this out, I realized I forgot to add the percentage here on line 55 to our translate X. So this won't work properly without having that percent. So let's go ahead and add that, save it, and let's test this out now. So if I go ahead and refresh our browser here once more, so hopefully now once we move the slider back from left to right, we should see the monthly price be updated and the page views updated as well. So if we go back and forth, you can see that there we go, our page views are being updated and the monthly price is changing. And now the final test here is to make sure that when we switch this from monthly billing to yearly billing, it's going to account correctly. So let's go ahead and switch this, and there we go. You can see that it's applying that 25% discount for the monthly price. Alright, so that's going to go ahead and do it for our 3 mini projects. If you guys did enjoy, I would really appreciate you guys leaving a like down below and subscribing if you're new for more content like this. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.